Hey guys, Morgan the Rebellious Reviewer. We talk about all things music, and today we're going to be talking about Ramonescore. So, this is the second installment in my 5 albums to get you into series. The first one was on symphonic metal, but today it's Ramonescore, and Ramonescore is a genre that originated in the late 80s to early 90s. It was popularized by record labels such as Lookout Records, and it basically consisted of bands that blended pop with punk but leaned heavily towards the punk side of things. And pretty much all the bands in this genre take extreme inspiration from, as well as sound a lot like the Ramones, hence the name Ramonescore. Now, Ramonescore is a subgenre of pop punk that I was familiar with prior to doing this video, but it was definitely the subgenre I was the least familiar with. I knew some albums and some songs here and there, but overall, I didn't know a lot about it. After listening to a bunch of albums for this video and a video I'm doing next month on 21st Century Ramonescore, here's my impression after going through all of that. This genre makes 90s era Blink-182 look like an alternative country band in terms of maturity. Don't get me wrong, I like a lot of stuff from this genre, but there is a fine line between endearingly immature and just plain annoying. And man, does this genre walk right on that line sometimes. Because of this, I consider Ramonescore to be a bit of a mixed bag of a genre that leans slightly towards the positive. With that said, let's start talking about some Ramonescore albums from the 90s, starting with it wouldn't be a Ramonescore list without Screeching Weasel somewhere on it. These guys basically invented the trend of blatantly copying the Ramones. And I also feel like this album embodies the spirit of Ramonescore pretty well. All of these songs are incredibly simple. A lot of them sound the same with only subtle differences, and the lyrics are incredibly immature with just a touch of humor to them. This would probably be really obnoxious if the songs weren't so fun. Interestingly, Screeching Weasel actually started out as a hardcore band before transitioning to the Ramonescore sound and after coming back from a breakup in 1991. And this album does have some hardcore influence with how aggressive these songs are despite their melodies. Yes, and speaking of melodies, songs like Cindy's on Methadone, Guest List, What We Hate, Veronica Hates Me, Teenage Freak Show, and Kamala's Too Nice have golden ones. And speaking of the last song, Kamala's Too Nice, ever since our last election, I haven't been able to hear that song without thinking to myself, yes, Kamala is too nice. She should have kneed Trump in the crotch. Anyway, if you want to get into Ramonescore, check this album and this band out. They're pretty much pioneers of this style, like I said. Their singer Ben Weasel is a garbage human being, though. Like, seriously, his attitude definitely explains why this album is so immature.
Hey, you motherfuckers, I only drink bud. Hey, you motherfuckers, I only drink bud.
Now, just to clarify, for anyone who doesn't know this band, they are sadly not LGBTQ+. Their name, The Queers, is actually being used in the traditional sense of the word, as in weird. Now, remember when I said that Ramonescore walks a fine line between endearingly immature and just plain obnoxious? Yeah, well, the Queers have ended up on different sides of that line at different points in their career. On one hand, you have this album. On the other hand, they also have an album with this title. And, yeah. I get that that kind of language was more acceptable in the 90s, but that doesn't mean it's aged well. As for this album, it's still pretty immature, but it's much more endearing than the album I just mentioned. It has your typical Ramonescore songs about adolescent crushes and goofy topics like only drinking bud and being in love with a girl with small breasts. However, it's not done in too cringy of a way here, and some of the songs like I Always Knew and Number One are actually kinda sweet. What really makes this album stand out, though, is that in addition to the Ramones influence, this album also kinda sounds like what would happen if the Beach Boys did a Ramonescore album. Yeah, this album has elements of both bubblegum and surf music. And man, does it sound good with Ramonescore. The melodies are great, and the whole album is just so chill yet upbeat that I can't not find it endearing. Now, with Screeching Weasel and the Queers, I had heard at least one song from each of them prior to making this video. This next band, on the other hand, I hadn't heard anything from, although I had heard the name. I'm glad I eventually remedied that because this next album is great.
So let's go. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. Together.
First things first, the Mr. T Experience is a really stupid band name, even by Ramonescore standards. As for the album title, Love is Dead, I'm pretty sure it's meant to be ironic, considering most of these songs are, in fact, love songs. And yeah, this is one of those mini Ramonescore albums that mostly focus on girls. Unlike the Queers, however, who can be a bit crass when it comes to talking about the opposite sex, this album by the Mr. T Experience is just adorable. This is basically the wholesome side of teenage love in album form. There's even a song on here called I Just Wanna Do It With You, which is not about sex, but instead about the socially awkward guy finding a girl who he wants to do everything with. And it's really sweet and adorable, and it shows that awkward pop punk guys can get girls and treat them well and not expect anything in return. Yeah, take a hint, nice guys, neckbeards, and incels. I didn't know any of these guys' songs prior to doing this video, and I haven't heard any of their albums outside of this one. But after this, I may have to check out more of their stuff, because, wow, these guys are legit great. Anyway, after 3 straight albums of immature songs about girls and goofy stuff, let's move on to another band that talks about that same stuff, but in a more unique way.
She looks like one, she dresses like one, got kicked out of the cop for having too much fun. She's my vampire girl.
Now, these guys are probably the Ramonescore band I was most familiar with prior to doing this video. That said, before I did this video, I had not heard Fun in the Dark by them. And I am kicking myself for that because, wow, this may be their most consistent 90s album that I've heard, at least. It talks about all the typical Ramones topics of girls and stupid stuff, but it does so with a bit of a Halloween twist, which is typical for the Groovy Ghoulies. Songs like She's My Vampire Girl, She's Got a Brain Scrambling Machine, and Don't Make Me Kill You Again are pure Halloween fun. The other songs are still mostly love songs, but they're really good love songs. And 2 of the Halloween songs I mentioned, namely She's My Vampire Girl and She's Got a Brain Scrambling Machine, those 2 are still technically about girls. So they manage to be a typical Ramonescore band, even as they're talking about Halloween stuff. It also helps that the melodies on a lot of these songs are legit great. I know I said that about Screeching Weasel as well, but that's the great thing about a lot of pop punk. The melodies are fantastic. And yes, that does include Ramonescore. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This genre sounds kinda samey. Pop melodies with a punk sound inspired by the Ramones, and lyrics about girls and stupid stuff. Well, yeah, you're right, actually, because the Ramonescore is not a super varied genre. In fact, it's pretty conservative, not politically, but in terms of how it sounds. It's definitely one of those genres that I can totally see people being turned off by just because a lot of it sounds the same. However, there is one album that has a bit less melody than your average Ramonescore album, and also mostly manages to avoid talking about the typical topics. It still sounds like the Ramones, but in a bit of a different way. So, who is this innovator of the Ramonescore genre? Well, now, keep in mind that I said that this album mostly manages to steer clear of Ramonescore cliches lyrically. Keyword being mostly, because there is a song on here called You're the Only One, and it is a love song, but what's interesting about this album is that a lot of it actually has a theme to it. It's not exactly a concept album, but a lot of these songs are either based on or inspired by, at the very least, B-horror and science fiction movies. Unlike the Groovy Ghoulies, these guys actually stick pretty close to the movies they're talking about with these songs. At least they don't try to turn War of the Worlds into a love song the way the Groovy Ghoulies probably would have. This album is still fun, but it feels like they're taking themselves a bit more seriously than, say, the Queers or the Mr. T Experience. This is a unique album within the Ramonescore genre, and I highly recommend it. I highly recommend all of these, actually. By the way, the Lillingtons would go on to reform under the name Teenage Bottle Rocket, who are one of the bigger 2000s era Ramonescore bands, and who we'll talk about in the next part, which should come out in June. Ramonescore may be a mixed bag of a genre, but at its best, it can be a lot of fun. And that's my video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. I'm Morgan the Rebellious Reviewer, and I'm out.